welcome to the first episode of the REUFORM podcast. Today, we are speaking about the first module of the project, Governance, Democracy and the Rule of Law, which was organized as part of the REUFORM project. Before we start with the conversation, I would like just to say a few brief words about the project. So, REUFORM aims to strengthen public engagement and communication around the EU integration process of North Macedonia. Through different thematic modules, the project brings together civil society organizations, journalists, media professionals, and young people to discuss key reform areas, understand the challenges, and develop practical recommendations. The REUFORM project is implemented within the framework of the Support to European Integration of North Macedonia project, financially supported by Sweden in collaboration with the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and the Ministry of European Affairs, and also implemented by UNOPS. In this episode, we will reflect on what was discussed during the first module, why governance, democracy, and the rule of law are so essential and so important for the EU integration process, and what impact this module can have for the participants and for the wider public dialogue. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Besa Arifi, our lecturer of the first module. Professor, thank you very much for joining us today. Also, I would like just to do a brief introduction of our lecturer. So, Professor Dr. Besa Arifi is a well-known university professor and expert in criminal law, rule of law, human rights, and democratic governance. Her work contributes strongly to public discussions on justice reform, institutional accountability, democratic institutions, and the protection of fundamental rights. During the first module, Professor Arifi worked with the participants on some of the most important questions related to the governance, democracy, and rule of law, especially in the context of the North Macedonian EU integration process. So, Professor, let us start with the first part of our discussion. So, the first module was focused on governance, democracy, and the rule of law. During these 2 days, program participants had the opportunity to learn, to discuss, and to work through practical exercises, maybe group work, case-based learning, and recommendation drafting. So, from your perspective, what was the module about, and what were the main issues that the participants addressed during this program?
Thank you, Blerta, for inviting me to be a guest in your very first podcast related to the project REUFORM. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy and honored to participate in the first module of this very important project, supported by all the actors that you mentioned, to which we should all be very thankful, because they made it possible for us to gather a group of very specific individuals who work in different fields to talk about issues that are of great importance, such as governance, democracy, and rule of law. So the first module was about this key reform area. And it was not a coincidence, actually, that the project started with this first module. Because as we know, in the EU integration path, the rule of law, democracy and governance is within that cluster that we call the fundamentals. And that is the first and the last cluster that is discussed in the EU negotiation process. So it is related to everything else that we do. And that's why talking about rule of law and trying to establish what needs to be done in that regard is very important. So what was the module about? We worked together. I come from a university. I come from University of Southeast European University, which is a partner into this project. And together with Strategers, we worked together to establish what would be the learning objectives of this module. So the first module was about talking about the institutions of the state and how they should be more prepared to join the EU, to take part in the EU negotiation process and be prepared to do the reforms that are needed in the fundamentals cluster. So how we did this? We had a group wonderful group of diverse individuals. So some of them were students, some of them were professionals, some of them were lawyers, the others were teachers, and also people that work with the media and CSOs, which is very important. So it was a very diverse group, and we started with an exercise, with a practical exercise, which was the primary reality check to see where we stand, taking into consideration relevant reports. And we mostly discussed and analyzed the EU Commission report, progress report for North Macedonia. So we did this first reality check to see the biggest gaps that are, because taking into consideration that we are mostly criticized in this area, so we wanted to see where the participants see the problem. After we got feedback from that exercise, we continued, me and another lecturer, we continued with our part, which was intended to be a bit theoretical or input by us as professors in this field, but however it was not intended to be a classical lecture, so we managed to get a very interactive environment where the participants also gave their input, and I was very happy about that. After that, we continued with exercises that were very practical. We finished the first day with an accountability map where we could identify the parts where there is, there are gaps in implementing reforms in terms of rule of law, and then we try to establish an accountability map about that, on how we should tackle them as institutions, but also as citizens, asking for accountability for this kind of reforms. So we closed with that during the first day, and in the second day we worked with case scenarios that were inspired by situations that we work with every day in our country, and which relate to, for example, judiciary, public prosecution, anti-corruption, and public administration reform. So all these areas are tackled in the rule of law, part of the European Commission report, and so the participants analyzed the cases and gave their score regarding the level of implementing the reforms in this field, taking into account different tests, such as the test of accountability, credibility, and transparency and independence of the institutions, preparation of the institutions, the resources that the institutions have for implementing these projects. So all these important things were taken into consideration in regard to scoring, to make an initial score about where we stand in this regard. And we finalized with a Socratic forum, which was like a plenary discussion where the participants shared their ideas that were then transferred into a set of 7 recommendations that came as a result from this model. I would say that it was a very successful model because the participants were very enthusiastic to talk about these issues, and they were really interested to live in a country that really does the best to integrate in the EU path, and to, which is more important, to make its institutions prepared and eligible to apply the EU norms. Okay, so the idea was not only to ask if whether we have the necessary laws, but actually to ask to make more deep questions: how these laws are implemented, what should we do what should our institutions do to implement them better, what should the citizens ask from the institutions, and which are the correct questions actually to be asked, because accountability is something that is the right also of the citizens to ask and to be informed about what the institutions are doing. So all in all, I think we had a forum of people who were very interested and who were actually very keen to see the process going on, and also they were optimists that one day we will live in a country that actually fulfills the standards of the European Union, especially in the field of rule of law, democracy, and governance.
Oh yes, good. Thank you very much, dear Professor. We all hope that, yeah. So actually, my next question is also about the gaps that you mentioned before. So I would like to ask you about importance actually of this topic, because why democracy, why rule of law and governance are so essential for the EU integration process of North Macedonia and also for citizens directly. Because when we speak about the EU integration, as you mentioned, we often speak about a legal alignment and reforms on paper. And of course, in practice, the citizens expect, let's say, independent institutions, transparency, as you said, effective anti-corruption mechanisms. So how do you see the gap between the legal alignment and the real implementation in practice?
Yeah. First of all, let me say that in the beginning, when the participants introduced themselves, some of them were worried that they will not understand, all the language that we will be speaking in, having in mind that this, talking about rule of law, governance, and democracy always seems always seem to be a legal topic, a typically legal topic, even for lawyers. It's a specific topic that is actually related to the EU terminology and jargon. But we made sure to explain to them that actually rule of law is important not only to the lawyers, but to everybody that lives in the country, because it relates to everything that we actually do. It relates to anti-corruption mechanisms. It relates to the quality of the service that we get from the institutions. It relates to the to healthcare, for example, to education, to major areas where people work in different professions. But again, they need to have institutions that are standardized, that abide by the law, and that are transparent and close to the public, open to the public, so that the public knows what's happening there. So we had cases that were brought up by the participants themselves that involved, for example, situations in hospitals and protocols that need to be taken into consideration, or other situations that relate to different institutions. And all in all, we came to a conclusion that in order to have strong state institutions, we need to have a process where laws are enforced, not only adopted. And we come now to the core question that you asked, because all the relevant reports say that we have a good legislation. We try to, as a country, we try to adopt the newest requirements of the EU acquis and the EU directives also in our legislation, and we do a good job with that. But unfortunately, we are not assessed only on how much our legislation is adjusted and aligned with the acquis. We are very much assessed on how this legislation is implemented in practice. And there's the biggest gap that we have. Sometimes we have very good laws, but we have problems to implement them in practice. And sometimes not so much accountability and responsibility of state institutions and the people that lead them to really explain what's going on. So what this model tried to do was, first of all, explain that we need to see the reforms through these tests, to see how credible they are, and to identify how transparent they are. So we talked about transparency and how institutions need to be transparent, and to they have obligations even under the law to be transparent and open to the public. And then we talked about the resources, because a big part of the EU Commission report also talks about the resources, because it's not enough to establish important institutions at the judiciary, public prosecution, anti-corruption mechanism, but you need to have resources about them, and the EU mentions this a lot in the reports. So you have to have staff which is eligible and which is prepared, trained to do the specific work, and to create, norms, and not only norms, but also decisions that are quality decisions. And so for this, they need to have resources, and resources mean independency. So we cannot have independent institutions if they don't have if they lack resources to be independent, and that's how you actually lack also independence if you don't have the resources. And so we talked about all these issues in different fields, and I think that the participants managed to actually analyze situations, not only replying with a simple reply that we have this in the law, but asking the right questions to see why these laws lack implementation.
Yeah, great. What impact is expected after this module? So how the participants who will participate in this module will support their, let's say, understanding in these topics on their future work, let's say?
Yeah, the participants came from different fields, as I explained earlier, and all their work is very relevant to the rule of law institutions and to implementing the rule of law mechanisms here. So I think it will have very good impact on their work, because they will, how to say, continue to ask the right questions. They will continue to ask for accountability when reforms are delayed, for example, and they will know that it is not enough only for an institution to say that we have the right law and we are doing our best to implement it, we have a strategy, we have a policy, etc. But the citizens will ask more and more important questions, such as why something is not implemented, why something delayed, and why it's not happening, although it is written somewhere on paper. This is so also for people that came from the civil society sector, because they also need to raise the awareness. Part of this module was also raising awareness to see how we can have better better implementation of all the mechanisms that we actually need to establish through the rule of law cluster. And so they will raise this awareness through their everyday work with CSOs and with the citizens. And I'm very happy to say that we had also people that were young people coming from CSOs, or also students who are just starting their careers and or are still students. And sometimes, you know, the young people, the young generation are shy to ask for more information and for more accountability by institutions. If we have managed to make them more curious, but also more persistent to ask for the information that they need to have as citizens, and the right to be informed is one of those, one of these important rights. So if we manage to tackle in them this how to say need to ask for more information and to not be satisfied only with superficial information, but to ask what were the criteria of decision making and to ask all the right questions, then I think we will be successful. The younger generation is the future of the country, and we need to make it possible for them to have critical thinking and to ask from the institutions to make the best to offer them a better life in this country, because it's very easy for them to find jobs everywhere in this time when there is so how to say availability and so many possibilities to live wherever in the world. But it is a challenge to keep them here, and in order to do that, we have to do our best as a society to build institutions that are trustworthy, that will make it worth it for the young generation to stay here and to contribute. So maybe they learn to contribute in this and to ask the right questions and even to be involved in decision making about issues that matter to them.
Yeah, actually, this is a very important point, because you know, the proposal, the REUFORM, was not just organizing trainings, but also the proposal was that the participants leave the module with better understanding and more confidence to contribute to the reform process in their own work and communities. So before we close, I would like just to ask you a final question. So after the completion of this module, what will be your key message to institutions, civil society, media, and the young people?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that, and we try to deliver all these messages also through the module. But again, to the institutions, I would say that rule of law is the utmost important thing that needs to be taken very seriously from all our institutions. If we don't do that as citizens of this country, not only as citizens but also as institution representatives, if we don't do that for our own sake, nobody will do it in our place. So we need to have a rule of law and accountable institutions, not only because EU asks that, but because we need that. We need to have a decent life in a country where the law functions equally for all and without discrimination and without being selective. So the law should be the same to all, and so we have a right to live in a country like that, and the institutions must provide that. So we have to have institutions that actually can work in that, and they should be aware that this is what makes living in a country decent enough to stay there. Okay, and so this is the obligation. On the other hand, I also wanted to say that the CSOs, the media, and the citizens in general, they also have rights to know and to be informed about what the institutions are doing in regard to rule of law, but they have also the obligation to be part of that process. Okay? Yeah. No, it is not the obligation only of the government, although the government has a major responsibility and should be held accountable in that regard. But again, it is also the obligation of the citizens and of the CSOs and of the media to follow this process closely and to ask for the reforms to be implemented and to be persistent in that and not be satisfied with just simple answers. And to the youth, of course, I would also say that it's not only their right, but it's also their obligation to ask for the best treatment by the institution, to ask for their place and to make their place in all the decision-making tables, to insist on that, because nobody will involve anybody if they do not insist on a cause. Okay, and so they should insist on taking their place and on their voices to be heard. So it's important that everybody's voice is heard. It's important that I would say the best message is that the laws should be implemented thoroughly, because we need that as a society, as individuals that live in this country, as a society, and also as institutions. Not because we have to check some boxes. This is what we should do for ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So thank you very much, Professor Besa Arifi, for your valuable contribution to the first module and for sharing your reflection with us today. So this discussion reminds us that the governance and democracy and the rule of law are not abstract topics. So they are directly connected with the quality of the institution and the protection of the citizens' rights, public trust, and of course North Macedonia progress toward the European Union. So thank you for everyone for following this podcast, and we invite you to continue following the REUFORM next modules and trainings. Thank you very much.